Have you ever noticed how English is full of these little curveballs, those phrases that uh, make perfect sense to native speakers, but like if you're not in the know, they can leave you totally lost.
Yeah, it's true. Like, there's this whole secret language, right, hidden just below the surface of, like, everyday English.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Like we're going deep into that secret language. We're going to explore four expressions that just add so much color and personality to, the way we speak.
Yeah, I'm excited to unpack these. This will be good.
Me too. Okay, so we're tackling throw in the towel, go pear-shaped, touch base, and bode well. It's a real mix, right? We've got American idioms, some British slang in there, just phrases that'll make you sound like, honestly, you've been hanging out with native speakers for, like, years.
Because that's the goal, right? Like, you don't just want to understand these expressions, you want to use them naturally without even thinking about it.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. And I think this first one really paints a picture, even if you've never, like, set foot in a boxing ring. Throw in the towel.
Ah, yes. The universal symbol of, like, all right, I'm done. Giving up. Admitting defeat.
Right. You've got these two boxers going at it. One is clearly getting pummeled, and then, boom, a towel comes flying into the ring, right? Like this dramatic surrender.
And it's amazing how that image, that visual is so strong. It translates even if you've, like, never actually watched a boxing match.
Totally. It's become this metaphor that everyone understands. Giving up, even if there isn't a literal fight happening. I mean, have you ever felt like throwing in the towel on something? Like a project at work that was just like, ugh, this is going nowhere. Or maybe a goal that just felt, I don't know, impossible.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all had those moments where, you just feel like you're banging your head against a wall. And it takes, honestly, a certain kind of wisdom, I think, to step back and say, okay, it's time to walk away.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because it's not always about, weakness, is it? Like sometimes throwing in the towel means you recognize that your energy is better spent somewhere else. Picking your battles, as they say.
Exactly. And the beauty of this idiom is it packs that whole kind of complex idea into just those few words.
Okay, so from the world of boxing, let's hop across the pond for a second. We're going to explore a phrase that's so delightfully British and wonderfully weird, might I add. Go pear-shaped.
Ah, yes. This one always makes me smile.
I know, right? It's like, what does that even mean? For something to go pear-shaped sounds like a baking disaster to me.
Well, in a way, it kind of is. Imagine this. You've got this plan, yeah, and everything's moving along smoothly, perfectly, and then suddenly it all just goes haywire. Things fall apart, go wrong. They take this unexpected turn, just like, if you had this perfectly round cake batter, but then it bakes into this wonky, lopsided pear.
Oh, I love that analogy. It really captures that feeling of, wait, how did we get here? Like things going hilariously wrong. And you know what I find fascinating about this phrase? There's this whole theory that it came from, get this, RAF pilots back in the 1940s.
That's right. Although I have to say, the exact origin, it's a bit of a mystery still, which honestly makes it even more fun to think about.
Totally. I just love picturing these pilots using this phrase, to describe some botched flying maneuver or a mission that just went totally sideways. It adds like a whole other layer to the expression.
Oh, it does. And because we're not 100% sure where it came from, it makes it even more fun to play with, I think. Like, imagine you're on this date and it's a disaster. You could say, well, that went pear-shaped fast. Or, I don't know, maybe a cooking experiment goes wrong. My whole recipe has gone pear-shaped.
Yeah, and it's funny because the more visual you can make it in your head, the easier it is to remember.
Precisely. Like, you're creating this little mental picture. Helps that meaning stick.
Okay, so we've seen how things can go dramatically wrong with go pear-shaped. But what about those times when you're actually trying to keep things on track? To stay connected, that's where our next phrase comes in, touch base. And for this one, we might have to dust off our baseball gloves.
Ah, yes. From, like, the baseball diamond to the boardroom, touch base has become this, like, staple of modern communication.
It really has. And it's funny how that literal act of touching a base in baseball, like making sure you're safe, has evolved to mean something totally different in the way we speak every day.
Oh, it has. Touching base these days, it's less about physical touch. It's more of that quick check-in, like, how do we make sure we're all on the same page?
Exactly. Like, think about it at work. You might say, hey, let's touch base next week and go over those project updates. Or even with friends, something simple like, let me touch base with you later about those dinner plans.
Oh, it's a very versatile phrase. Although,
Yeah.
I do think it's worth mentioning, in certain contexts, especially like formal ones, touch base can sound a bit jargony, a bit overused.
That's such a good point. It's
Yeah.
like anything in language, I guess. You've got to use the right tool for the job, right? Like sometimes a simple check-in or update might be better.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between, being clear and still adding a bit of color to what you're saying.
Okay, so we've got expressions for defeat, disaster, and connection. Now for our final phrase, let's shift gears a bit from action to, I don't know, anticipation, to the realm of making predictions and hopefully some good ones. It's time to talk about bode well.
Yes. Now, this phrase, it's got that sense of optimism, like a hint that things are looking up,
It does, and I have to
That's
admit,
it.
bode,
Yeah.
it even sounds a bit like something out of like a Shakespearean play to me. Not exactly a word you hear every day.
You're right. It's got that kind of old-timey feel to it. But bode actually goes all the way back to Old English, where it meant like to announce or to foretell. It's like a less mystical, more everyday version of fortune telling, right?
I love that. Instead of gazing into a crystal ball, we're looking for, I don't know, signs, signals, things that suggest a positive outcomes on the way.
Exactly. You're recognizing those indicators that suggest, hey, things are moving in the right direction.
So like if you've had a week of rain and suddenly the sun comes out, you could say, this sunshine bodes well for our picnic plans.
Exactly. Or maybe, in a business sense, if a company has a really successful quarter, you could say, these strong sales bode well for the company's future.
And it doesn't have to be limited to business either, right? You can use it for all sorts of things, like her dedication to studying. It bodes well for her future career.
Exactly. It's a phrase you can use in all sorts of situations when you want to express that sense of, like, optimism, that sense of anticipation.
I love it. We've gone from throwing in the towel in total defeat to hoping things bode well for the future.
Wow.
All in, what, like 10 minutes?
It's amazing how much ground we covered, right? But that's what I love about language, These little phrases, they seem simple, but they add so much to the way we speak.
They really do.
Yeah.
And what's so cool is that language is alive. It doesn't stand still. It's constantly evolving with new words and expressions popping up all the time.
They really are. It's true. And it's exciting, but I don't know about you, but sometimes it feels like there are so many cool phrases out there, so many interesting expressions that you just want to use them all at once. But something tells me that's probably not the best approach, right?
Right. You've got to be careful, I think. It's like, it's a good analogy. Okay. It's like cooking, right? You wouldn't dump a whole container of paprika into a dish, even if you love paprika. A dash here and there adds depth, flavor, but too much overwhelms everything. I think it's the same with idioms and slang and all that.
Such a good point. Little goes a long way. So then the question becomes, how do you actually strike that balance? Like, how do we become, masters of the linguistic spice rack?
Right, right. How do we do that?
Well, I think it starts with paying attention.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't, wear a ball gown to a business meeting, would you? Same idea. You use the language that fits the situation, right? So notice when native speakers use these phrases, when it feels natural, when it adds to the conversation, and yeah, even when it might be a bit over the top.
So it's like being a language detective almost. Like you're observing, taking mental notes, gathering all the clues about how these expressions work in their natural habitat.
Exactly. And just like, with any good detective, practice is key.
Right.
So don't be afraid to actually use these phrases in your own conversations. Start small, maybe low stakes situations, chatting with friends, family, they can be your sounding board.
Oh, for sure. And I bet that leads to some funny moments along the way.
Absolutely. Look, making mistakes, totally normal part of learning any language. It happens to everyone.
Oh, it's so true. I remember when I was first learning English, I was trying to use the phrase piece of cake, to describe something easy. But I accidentally said easy as pie. Yeah. Like completely mixed them up.
That's hilarious. But, even though it was technically a mistake, it still got your meaning across, right?
It did. And, it's those moments, those little stumbles, those discoveries. That's what makes language learning fun, honestly.
It really does. Because at the end of the day, language isn't just about like grammatical perfection or whatever, right? It's about connection. It's about expressing yourself. And honestly, sometimes it's just about having a little fun with it.
Exactly. And speaking of fun, I have a challenge for our listeners. So we've explored 4 really interesting English expressions today, but I'm curious about the flip side. What about those words or phrases in your own native language, the one you grew up with?
Yeah.
What do you wish you could just pluck out of that language and drop right into English?
Oh, I love that idea. Like maybe there's this word in your language that captures a feeling perfectly, but there's just no single word in English that quite gets it right. Or a slang term that's so vivid, so dot evocative, that it just deserves to be shared with the world.
Yes, exactly. We want to hear about those linguistic gems, those words and phrases that make your language special, the ones that make you say, ugh, I wish there were an English word for that.
Wouldn't that be amazing if we could just borrow a little bit of that linguistic magic from each other?
It would be incredible. And I think at its heart, that's really what language learning is all about, isn't it?
Hmm.
Expanding our view of the world one word, one expression at a time.
It really is. It's you suddenly realize that there are all these different ways to say the same thing, to express the same feeling, and it makes you see how language shapes how we see the world?
It's true. And sometimes, like, those different ways of saying things, they give you this little glimpse into a whole other way of experiencing things, a different perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Did you know? Okay, this is a fun one. In Japanese, there's this word that literally translates to, get this, eating atmosphere.
Eating atmosphere. Okay, now I need to hear more about this one. That sounds intriguing.
So it's imagine this. You go to a restaurant and the food, amazing. But it's not just about the food itself, right? It's the whole experience, the sights, the sounds, even who you're with. The atmosphere eating could be off, even if the food is good, and it just wouldn't be as satisfying.
Wow. That's such a cool concept. It's like
Yeah.
we've all felt that, right? But I don't know if I've ever had a single word in English to describe it.
Right. It's like they've given a name to this feeling we all recognize. Or, okay, think about this one. The Welsh word, hyreth. It's this feeling of intense longing for a home, but maybe that home doesn't even exist anymore. Or maybe it never did. It's really hard to explain in English with just one word.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
even if we can't find a perfect translation for these words, even just trying to wrap our heads around them, it opens up these new ways of thinking, I feel like.
It does, just like language learning itself, right? It's not just about memorizing vocabulary lists. It's about, I don't know, it stretches your brain a little, lets you experience things in new ways.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So to kind of wrap up our deep dive today, we've gone from, what, the boxing ring to the wild blue yonder, from baseball diamonds to, well, perfectly shaped and not so perfectly shaped fruit.
That's one way to put it. And we've seen how all these little phrases, these everyday expressions, they add so much, right? Color, humor, even a touch of poetry to how we speak.
They really do. And hey, maybe we've even inspired you to try a few of them out yourself. Sprinkle them into your conversation, see what happens.
Right. Go on a little linguistic treasure hunt of your own, because
Yeah.
that's the fun part.
Exactly. The beauty of language is that there's always something new to discover, right?
Oh.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the wonderful, wacky world of everyday English.